So, I don't know what I want to say yet, but I'm just going to speak and let the words flow. So, two things happened. A few days ago, I finished reading The Hour of the Star by Clarice Lispector, and it just broke my heart in the best way possible. You know, it's such a well written, kind of like meta narrative. It's a really beautiful, very tragic story. And then last night, I went to the movies with my friend and we watched Anora, which I thought was just amazing. It's the new Sean Baker. And it was such a good cinematic experience. Like, I loved everything about the film, and it's another very tragic story. And when I got home, I felt really struck by the links between the two protagonists of these stories. So if you haven't read it, The Hour of the Star is about this young woman. Her name is Macabea, and she lives in Rio de Janeiro. And she's very poor. She pretty much just eats like hot dogs and coffee, and her life is really miserable. Lots of neglect, lots of marginalization. There's just like no respite. Respite. There's just no relief in her struggle. And then similarly in Anora, the film, Annie is the protagonist, and she's the stripper, and she lives in Brooklyn, and she basically has to work this like shitty job, just having to be at the mercy of random men's like objectification. And she doesn't have any real agency. She has no prospects for a future because, well, you know, once you get old or once you get ugly, you get thrown away in establishments like that because sex work is precarious and you're disposable. And so I felt like I experienced these two stories of these two very tragic female figures in really close succession. And I don't know, it just shook something in me. I think about feminine identity a lot and what it means to be a woman in the world, especially in really strict and brutal societal structures that are more common outside of the West, but they exist here too, just in different shapes. I just feel very acutely aware of the fact that most women globally are not free. We exist in this space of, what is it, Paglia calls it, like the female abyss or the feminine abyss, where essentially you're just an object. You have no self-determination, no active participation in your own existence. You're just a thing to be consumed. You're not a person, you're not a human. And this just gets amplified when you throw in the socioeconomic dimension. Both Macabea and Anora were poor. They were just poor women, and that's their great crime, apparently. And it makes sense to me why all of this like trad wife and sprinkle versus like 4B movement shit is really popping up out of the collective unconscious right now, aka the internet. It just feels like we're culturally reckoning with the historic repression of the feminine dimension. You know, this is karma. You spend however many years reducing women and the feminine principle to inhuman status, and well, this is what you get, you know? Women are just not going to take this shit anymore. And I see this reckoning happening in both men and women. I feel like the relationship between the genders is so broken, so fractured and destroyed in so many ways. Like, trust has just been lost. And both men and women are very angry about it. And we're all misdirecting a lot of that energy towards the other, when if you boil it all down, like actually boil it all down, it's not necessarily anyone's fault. It's more of a collective debt. And that being said, like, I'm not going to sit here and act like some men don't deserve the anger that they're getting, because they do. The entire time that I've been alive and what I've seen with the way that men have treated women collectively, like, you're lucky if anger is all that's coming your way. And I feel like I can say that while at the same time acknowledging that I don't think that hating on men and festering resentment is going to solve anything. The reason that there's even all of this anger is because there's still love there. It just doesn't have anywhere to go. And the anger is part of the process. But if you stay stuck there, it's just going to continue the cycle. And it doesn't actually get to the root of the issue, which I believe is spiritual in nature. Like spiritual and economic, but to me, those are often the same thing, or at least similar things. And this relates back to Anora and Macabea. I've always thought that poverty is one of the great evils in this world. It destroys the human spirit, it breaks people, and it turns them into animals. And I know because I've been there. I've seen what poverty does to a person, to a family, to a community. It's horrific. And I know what it takes to overcome it, the resilience and the fucking cojones necessary to overcome poverty, both materially but also psychologically. It's like beyond. It's almost too much, A kind of death has to happen. Like, as you move up in economic status, like you gain agency and you gain, human status in society, but you also lose something of yourself. Something, I don't want to say pure because that's not the right word, but I would say that you lose something blameless, a kind of naivete, because you have to harden and because you come face to face with the reality of what it means to be a woman in the world. I saw it on Anora's face, both when she started dealing with Fanny, but also when they were done, like during their conversation on the stairs. And then right at the end of the film, when she's in the car with Igor. And I know that look, And I feel like I read it in Macabea's story right at the end when she gets hit by the car and she's about to die. Oh, that part, like, it just really got to me. I'll read you my favorite passage because I have the book right here. Would she have longed for the future? I hear the ancient music of words and words. Yes, that's it. At this very moment, Macabea feels a deep pause in her stomach and almost vomited. She wanted to vomit something that wasn't her body, to vomit something luminous, a 1,000-pointed star. Ugh, I don't know. I've often identified with tragic heroines. I love when a tragic heroine can get revenge. I love a good revenge story. That makes me nut. But I also still feel comforted by these stories when they don't get revenge, when they kind of just succumb to fate and to the ways of the world. It's so real, it's so existential. Macabea is just tragic all the way through. Like, she doesn't even have beauty as a weapon. Meanwhile, Annie has beauty, she has youth, she has street smarts, but it's still not enough. We all succumb to the world and to the passing of time, one way or another. And I can hear how this sounds really depressing, but I promise, I don't think of it in this defeatist kind of way. I actually think that facing this kind of barren, brutal truth makes having a sense of hope all the more of a miracle. It gives hope more of a value to me, to be able to have faith and to dream in such circumstances. That's a miracle. And with both of these stories, hope plays this very mythic role, the promise of a deus ex machina. With Macabea, she's injected with this overwhelming deluge of hope as the fortune teller tells her all these good things that's going to happen to her in the future. And for the first time in her entire life, she wants something for herself. And she dies literally 2 minutes later, but she experienced that wanting, that desire for something better, brighter, something more. She could have gone her whole life without ever feeling that feeling, but she didn't, and right at the end, she had hope. And then we as an audience were given hope when she dies. At least on my end, I was like, I hope she knows some sort of peace now, my hope for her was just in her final release from tragedy. It was just like a little prayer that now, hopefully, because she's dead, she can be free. And it's the same for Annie. She had so much hope when she married Vani, a hope for a better life, for a family, for belonging, just for love. And he couldn't give that to her. In fact, he actually destroyed a part of her through all the false promises. But she still got to experience that hope. She had the image of her dreams in her mind, which is very important. The fact that she was able to see what it could look like. And then even after Vanny destroyed her hopes, she was given more hope in the form of Igor. When he held her, she was like breaking down and crying right at the end. Even though it's like a very, it's a heartbreaking moment, there's still hope there as well. It's like the hope that she can put the experience with Vanny behind her, quit stripping, and have a nice life and fall in love with Igor or whatever. And it's not realistic, but the hope is still there. And that hope in and of itself is what's capable of sustaining all of this, all of life. It's what allows us to survive. It gives depth and meaning to suffering. It's just so beautiful and tragic at the same time. If you haven't seen Anora, go see it. And if you haven't read Hour of the Star, go read it. And that's it. I think that's pretty much all I have to say today.